The night I lost my apartment, I also watched the most powerful man in Charleston bleed on the sidewalk because of me. The eviction notice was still folded in my jacket pocket, the paper soft from how many times I'd smoothed it flat and pretended it wasn't real. I'd stood in the hallway of my building on Meeting Street while my landlord changed the locks, my name already erased like I'd never existed there. 24 years old, an art degree that hadn't paid rent, and nowhere to go but the streets after midnight. It was raining hard enough to sting. Cold, sharp drops that soaked through my boots and turned the city into a blur of street lamps and reflections. I clutched my portfolio to my chest, my sketches my last proof that I was more than a failure with a backpack. I wasn't watching the road. I stepped off the curb too fast, my heel slipping on wet stone, my body pitching forward. A horn blared. Brakes screamed. The black SUV swerved to avoid me. Then came the sound I'd hear in my dreams for years. Metal hit stone. Bone hit pavement. A body slid. I screamed and ran before my mind could catch up. He was lying half in the street, rain slicking his coat dark, blood cutting a thin line down his temple. Someone shouted for an ambulance. Someone else swore. No one touched him. I dropped to my knees, my portfolio splashing into a shallow puddle. "Oh God, sir," I said, my hands shaking as I reached for his neck like I'd seen in movies. I found a pulse. Strong. Alive. Relief hit me so hard I almost cried. His eyes opened. Steel gray. Sharp. Focused despite the pain. They locked on me like I was the only solid thing left in the world. "You," he said hoarsely. "I'm here," I whispered. "Don't move. Please." His hand came up, fingers closing around my wrist with unexpected strength. Warm, steady. "Don't go," he said. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a threat. It was something closer to fear. "I won't," I promised, even though I didn't know why I was making promises to a stranger bleeding in the rain. The sirens came fast after that. Paramedics took over, voices calm and practiced, hands efficient. They eased him onto a stretcher, his grip loosening reluctantly before disappearing beneath a thermal blanket. One of them looked at me. "You know him?" I shook my head. "No, I stepped into the street, he swerved." The paramedic gave me a long look. "You should come to the hospital. Police will want a statement." I nodded numbly and followed the ambulance, my legs moving on instinct while my mind lagged behind, still stuck on the weight of his hand around my wrist and the way his eyes had searched my face like he was trying to memorize it. At the hospital, everything smelled like antiseptic and fear. I sat in a hard plastic chair, clothes damp, hair frizzing, my portfolio hugged to my chest like a shield. A woman in a tailored blazer finally approached me, her posture all authority. "Miss, I need to ask you some questions." I gave my statement in a blur, my voice shaking when I admitted I'd caused the accident. She listened, expression unreadable, then nodded. "You're lucky," she said. "So is he." "Is he okay?" I asked. She hesitated. "He will be." It wasn't until another woman rushed past, whispering urgently into her phone, that I heard his name. "Mayor Hale is out of surgery." Yes, the mayor. My stomach dropped. Mayor Thomas Hale. I'd seen his face on billboards, campaign ads. The man who'd rebuilt Charleston's waterfront, who spoke about integrity and second chances like he believed in them. And I'd nearly killed him. Hours later, when the sky outside the waiting room windows began to pale, I stood to leave quietly, desperate to disappear before anyone decided I was a liability. I didn't make it far. "Miss." His voice stopped me cold. I turned. He stood in the hallway, taller than I'd expected, a bandage at his temple, one arm in a sling. He looked tired, older than the photos, lines etched deep around his mouth and eyes. But those gray eyes were the same, locked on me. "You stayed," he said. "I was told to," I replied, my throat tight. "I'm sorry. I stepped into traffic. If I hadn't..." He raised his uninjured hand. "You saved my life." I stared at him. "I caused the accident." "And you didn't run," he said quietly. "That matters." For a moment, the hallway seemed to fade. There was just him and me, and the echo of rain still ringing in my ears. "I'm Thomas," he said after a beat. "Lena," I replied automatically. "Thank you, Lena." I nodded and left before my legs gave out. I told myself that was the end of it. I was wrong. A week later, I was sleeping on my friend Marisol's couch, my portfolio stacked under the coffee table, when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. "Hello? Ms. Carter?" a man asked. "This is the office of Mayor Thomas Hale." I sat up so fast I nearly dropped the phone. "I think you have the wrong Lena Carter." "No, ma'am. The mayor saw your mural under the Calhoun Street overpass. He'd like to speak with you about a commission." My breath caught painfully. That mural had been my last reckless act before eviction, painted overnight, unpaid, unnoticed except by the ghosts I'd poured into it. A girl standing knee-deep in water, holding the tide back with her bare hands. "I'm not—" I swallowed. "I'm not a professional." "He's aware," the man said. "He's very specific about wanting you." I should have said no. Everything about it screamed danger, power, exposure. The imbalance alone made my skin prickle, but my bank account was empty. My pride already broken. So 2 days later, I stood in the mayor's private office at City Hall, my hands sweating through borrowed gloves, my heart hammering like it wanted to escape. He stood when I entered. Up close, he was overwhelming in a way that had nothing to do with height or money. It was presence. Control earned the hard way. "You came," he said. "I needed the work," I admitted. A corner of his mouth lifted. "Honesty. I appreciate that." He gestured to the window overlooking the harbor. "I want a portrait, not for the public. For me." I blinked. "Why me?" "Because you don't paint what people want to see," he said. "You paint what's there." Something in his voice told me this mattered more than he was letting on. He offered me a temporary studio space in a guest house on his property. Security. Pay that made my knees weak. I accepted. That night, alone in the quiet room, I stared at my sketch pad, unable to sleep. Every instinct warned me I was stepping into a world that could swallow me whole. The first time he sat for me, he didn't speak. Neither did I. I sketched the lines of his face, the weight he carried, the grief that lingered just under the surface. Halfway through, he opened his eyes. "You're seeing something," he said. "So are you," I replied, before I could stop myself. His gaze didn't leave mine. "You look like someone who's lost everything." The words hit too close to the truth. Before I could respond, footsteps echoed outside the studio. His chief of staff's voice filtered through the door, sharp and irritated. "She's living on the property? Thomas, this is a mistake." I froze, charcoal smudging my fingers. He looked away from me, jaw tightening. And in that moment, I realized my survival had just collided with his reputation, and neither of us was going to walk away untouched. I tried to pretend I didn't hear his chief of staff's words echoing in my head. "She's living on the property. This is a mistake." I went back to the guest house that night with charcoal still under my nails and a heaviness in my chest I couldn't shake. The room was beautiful in a quiet, intentional way. Wide windows, pale wood floors, a small porch overlooking a marsh that glowed silver under the moon. It felt borrowed, temporary, like everything else in my life, like him. The next morning, I woke before dawn and painted until my wrist ached. I told myself focus was survival, finish the portrait, take the money, leave before feelings could turn into something dangerous. But Thomas Hale made danger feel like gravity. He arrived just after 7, suit jacket slung over one arm, tie already loosened. He looked tired, shadows bruising the skin beneath his eyes. "You didn't sleep," he said. "Neither had I. You shouldn't be here so early." His mouth curved faintly. I could say the same. He sat, settling into stillness with the ease of a man used to scrutiny. For a while, the only sound was charcoal against paper and birds waking in the marsh. "You heard them last night," he said quietly. "Yes." "I won't have them talk about you like that." I stopped drawing. "They're right. This is inappropriate. His eyes met mine. Is it? You're the mayor. I gestured vaguely at myself. A broke artist sleeping in your guest house. You're a woman with talent, he said. And I hired you for it. That's not what people will think. A muscle jumped in his jaw. People think what they want. I can't live my life by their worst assumptions. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to let his certainty wrap around me and make everything simple. Instead, I went back to my drawing. Days passed like that. Me sketching, him sitting, the space between us thick with things we didn't say. He never touched me, never crossed a line. Somehow, that restraint made everything worse. We talked, though, carefully at first. He told me about his wife, Eleanor, how they'd met in law school, how she'd laughed too loud and believed too easily in second chances, how cancer had taken her fast and left him standing in a house full of silence and unfinished conversations. I learned how to be alone, he said one morning, staring out the window instead of at me, and how to lead. I'm not sure I learned how to be happy. I told him about my mother's debts, the way I'd dropped out of grad school to help and never made it back, about the landlord who'd smiled apologetically while changing the locks. You shouldn't have to carry all that, he said. Everyone carries something. He looked at me then, really looked, like he was memorizing the shape of my face. Yes, he said. They do. The portrait began to change after that. I stopped trying to make him look strong and started letting the vulnerability show, the grief, the resolve forged by loss. He noticed immediately. That's not how the public sees me, he said. I'm not painting the public, I replied. I'm painting you. The air shifted. He stood abruptly. We should stop for today. My heart thudded. Did I do something wrong? No, he said too quickly. That's the problem. He left without another word. By the next afternoon, Charleston was buzzing. A photo had surfaced online, grainy but unmistakable. Me stepping out of City Hall behind him, portfolio tucked under my arm, his hand hovering at my back as if guiding me through the crowd. The caption was brutal. Mayor's new muse, age gap romance raises eyebrows. My phone exploded with notifications, messages from people I barely knew, comments that made my stomach churn. I found him in his office, the blinds drawn, his chief of staff pacing like a caged animal. This is exactly what we warned you about, she snapped when she saw me. She needs to go. Enough, Thomas said sharply. She spun on him. Your approval ratings? I said enough. She stormed out, heels clicking like gunfire. I stood there, shaking. I didn't mean for this. I know, he said, rubbing his temples. They're turning it into something it's not. Isn't it? I asked softly. He looked up. The pain in his eyes was unmistakable. Do you want it to be? The question hung between us, heavy and electric. I don't know, I whispered. I know it scares me. It scares me too, he admitted, because I want you. And wanting you feels reckless. My breath caught. Then maybe we should stop. He stared at me like that idea physically hurt. Is that what you want? I thought of the marsh at dawn, of his quiet presence, of the way he saw me like I mattered. No, I said honestly, but wanting doesn't make it right. Silence stretched. I'll end the commission, he said finally, voice rough. Pay you in full. I won't put you through this. The words landed like a blow. If that's what you think is best, I said, even though every part of me screamed. He nodded once like a man accepting a sentence. I went back to the guest house and cried until my chest ached. That night, sleep wouldn't come. The house was too quiet, too empty. I wandered into the main house without thinking, drawn by a light still on in his study. The door was ajar. I shouldn't have gone in, but I did. Papers were spread across his desk, policy drafts, campaign notes, letters from constituents, and a thin manila folder with my name typed neatly on the tab. My stomach dropped. I opened it with trembling fingers. Everything was there. My eviction, my mother's medical bills, my school records, a quiet, thorough accounting of my life at its worst. Footsteps sounded behind me. Lena. I spun around, the folder clutched to my chest. You investigated me. His face went pale. I needed to know who I was bringing onto my property. You needed control, I shot back. You didn't trust me. That's not true. Then why does it feel like you own me? My voice cracked. Like every part of my life is something you can access whenever you want. I was trying to protect you, he said desperately. The press digs. They destroy people. I wanted to be prepared. You didn't tell me, I said. You didn't give me a choice. He stepped closer. I'm sorry. I should have told you. You don't get to decide what's best for me, I said, tears spilling. I trusted you. I know, he whispered, and I hate that I hurt you. I dropped the folder onto the desk like it burned. I can't do this, I said. I can't be another thing you manage. Lena, I need to leave. He reached for me, stopping himself at the last second, his hand falling uselessly to his side. Please, don't disappear. The plea in his voice nearly undid me. But I'd learned what happened when I stayed where I didn't belong. I packed that night, quietly, efficiently, like someone practiced at leaving. He stood in the doorway as I shouldered my backpack, rain starting to fall outside just like the night we met. I never meant to cage you, he said. I know, I replied. But you did anyway. I walked past him without touching, my heart shattering with every step. At Marisol's apartment, I slept on the couch again, staring at the ceiling, wondering how something that had felt like rescue could turn into another kind of loss. The portrait remained unfinished. So did whatever we had been becoming. And somewhere deep inside me, beneath the anger and the hurt, was a quieter pain. The fear that I had just walked away from the one person who had truly seen me, and that he might finally let me go. I told myself leaving was the bravest thing I'd ever done. Some nights, lying on Marisol's couch with the city humming outside the window, I almost believed it. Other nights, I stared at the ceiling until dawn, my chest tight with the echo of his voice, the memory of his stillness when I painted him, the way he'd said my name like it mattered. I painted during the day in borrowed spaces, community centers, an unused storage room behind a cafe, anything to keep my hands busy and my mind from drifting back to him. Charleston didn't let me forget. His face was everywhere, on the news, on posters, on screens in diner corners. But something had changed. His smile was gone. The headlines had shifted from speculation to scrutiny. Mayor Hale faces ethics inquiry approval ratings dip amid personal controversy. I tried not to read them. I failed. 2 weeks after I left, Marisol came home with worry etched into her face. Lena, she said carefully, did you see the press conference? My stomach dropped. What press conference? She handed me her phone. Thomas stood at a podium outside City Hall, the harbor behind him. He looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I've spent my career asking this city to trust me, he said, to believe that leadership should be built on integrity, not convenience. Today, I'm stepping down as mayor of Charleston. I covered my mouth, tears springing instantly. This decision is mine alone, he continued. I refuse to allow personal speculation, much of it unfair, to distract from the work this city deserves. I will not cling to power at the cost of someone else's dignity. The reporter shouted questions. He ignored them. I loved once, he said quietly. And I lost her. I thought that loss meant I had to close myself off from anything real. I was wrong. The feed cut. I sank onto the couch, shaking. He'd resigned. For me. No, I whispered to the empty room. You didn't have to do that. But he had, and the weight of it crushed me. I spent the next 3 days pacing, painting, crying, starting sentences I never finished. Guilt gnawed at me, sharp and relentless. I hadn't asked him to give up everything. I hadn't wanted to be the reason he lost himself. On the fourth day, my phone rang. His name lit up the screen. I stared at it for a full minute before answering. Hello? Lena. His voice was rough, stripped of polish and authority, just a man on the other end of a line. I won't keep you long. You resigned, I said, the words tumbling out. Why would you do that? A pause. Then, because power isn't worth having if it's used as a shield instead of a truth. My throat tightened. You didn't need to prove anything to me. I needed to prove it to myself, he said. I spent years convincing myself that duty required sacrifice. I never asked who was being sacrificed. I closed my eyes. I'm not calling to ask you to come back, he continued. I'm calling because I owe you honesty. I listened, my heart pounding. I did investigate you, he said. And it was wrong. It came from fear, of scandal, of loss, of wanting to protect something I didn't know how to hold gently. I've spent the last weeks confronting that part of myself. You gave up your career, I whispered. I gave up a title, he corrected. There's a difference. Silence stretched between us, heavy and fragile. The portrait, he said softly. It's unfinished, isn't it? Yes. I don't want it finished unless you choose to finish it. As yourself, not as someone standing in my shadow. Tears slid down my cheeks. Thomas, I don't expect forgiveness, he said. I don't expect anything. I just needed you to know that loving you made me want to be better, and even if I never see you again, that will matter. The line went quiet. I stared at my phone long after the call ended, my heart aching in a way that felt strangely hopeful. That night, I pulled out the portrait. I hadn't been able to look at it since I left. The charcoal lines were bold but incomplete, his eyes only sketched, his expression unresolved. It struck me then how much it mirrored us. I painted until my fingers cramped. Not the mayor, not the symbol. The man who stood bleeding in the rain and asked me not to leave. When I finished, dawn was breaking. 2 days later, I went to the riverfront. The old pier smelled like salt and memory. It was where I'd painted my first mural, where I'd tried to convince myself I could hold back the tide alone. He was there, leaning against the railing, hands in his coat pockets. No security, no entourage, just Thomas. He turned when he sensed me, his breath hitching visibly. You came, he said. So did you, I replied. For a moment, neither of us moved. The space between us felt charged, fragile, sacred. I brought something, I said, lifting the wrapped canvas. His eyes darkened. You didn't have to. I wanted to. I handed it to him. He unwrapped it slowly, carefully, like it might disappear if he rushed. When he saw the portrait, his breath caught. That's me, he said hoarsely. Yes. Tears filled his eyes, unguarded and honest. You didn't make me strong. No, I said. I made you true. He looked up at me then, something open and raw in his gaze. I don't want to cage you, he said. Ever. I don't want to be a savior or an authority or a story people whisper about. I want to stand beside you, if you'll let me, as an equal. I swallowed hard. And if I choose myself, if I choose my art, my mess, my uncertainty, I'll be here, he said. Not in front of you, not behind you, with you. I stepped closer, close enough to feel his warmth, his steady presence. I was afraid, I admitted, of losing myself again, of becoming something small. You don't become small around me, he said. You make me larger. I reached for his hand, threading my fingers through his. He squeezed gently, reverently. I don't need you to give up who you are, I said, but I need honesty, space, choice. You have all three, he said without hesitation. I smiled through tears. Then I choose you. He didn't kiss me right away. He rested his forehead against mine, breathing me in like he was grounding himself in something real. When his lips finally met mine, It wasn't desperate or consuming. It was steady, certain, like coming home after a long, hard road. Months later, life looked different. Thomas taught part-time at the university, his mind still sharp, his passion redirected. I rented a sunlit studio near the water, my work finally selling, not because of his name, but because my voice had found its way onto canvas. We moved slowly, intentionally, learned each other in daylight and quiet mornings, in arguments that ended with understanding instead of withdrawal. The city still talked. We stopped listening. On our porch at dusk, with paint drying on my hands and his arm warm around my shoulders, I realized something simple and profound. Love didn't rescue me, it didn't fix him, it met us where we were, and asked us to grow. And this time, neither of us walked away. If this story moved you, please subscribe so you don't miss the next emotional slow burn romance. Comment your favorite moment or line. I'd love to know which part stayed with you. Share this story with someone who believes in second chances, quiet strength, and love that heals.